All right, this is the call to order for the February 26th, 2025 special meeting of the Woodside Planning Commission, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please call the roll.
Chair Weaver,
Present.
Vice Chair Gar, Commissioner Apfel,
Present.
and Commissioner Ganerko. Commissioner Tauber is noted absent.
Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda. You do have 5 desk items for the ADU ordinance discussion tonight. All of those desk items are generally supportive of the ADU ordinance. A couple of them have some suggested changes.
We'll move on to the public comment period. This is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on items relevant to the town of Woodside and its planning commission, but which are not on tonight's agenda. Any comments made tonight by members of the public cannot be acted upon by the planning commission, but can be noted by the commissioners or staff and agendized at future planning commission meetings. Is there anyone present that wants either in person or online that would like to speak on an item not on tonight's agenda?
I see no raised hands online.
All right, given that, I will close the public comment period for items not on the agenda and move on to the consent calendar, which is, I believe, a review and approval of the January 22nd, 2025 meeting minutes. Did any commissioner or member of the public want to make any revisions to the minutes before they're approved?
I have no changes.
All right, there being no mention of any changes required, I would take a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Was that the motion or a second?
If someone makes the motion, then they can second it.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes.
Second the motion.
Chair Weaver,
Yes.
Vice Chair Gar,
Yes.
Commissioner Apfel,
Yes.
and Commissioner Ganerko.
Yes.
Okay, given that, a public hearing on proposed revisions to the municipal code to facilitate the construction of ADUs within the town of Woodside. And I believe the context of this is a public hearing for those proposed changes to the municipal code, and the planning commission would be doing a resolution of recommendation to town council for further action. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And given that, Melanie, do you want to present this for us?
I'll start with just a brief introduction, and then Melanie will take it away.
Okay.
Just a reminder, those who may not be aware in the audience, back in June 2024, the Planning Commission held a study session reviewing a number of potential changes to the municipal code as it relates to ADU construction and looking at different ways to provide more flexibility. Some of the topics at that time that were reviewed were looking at the potential of conversion of the potential conversion of barns into ADUs, as well as looking at height requirements for ADUs and how these regulations may possibly be changed to provide more flexibility in an effort to increase ADU production within the town of Woodside. Over the past several years, state laws have increasingly become more lenient towards ADU construction, and some of the state laws have certain mandates for the cities and towns to follow. Some of the new regulations require local jurisdictions to approve certain types of ADUs. HCD interprets state law to allow conversions of any existing accessory structures. And another item to note with state laws is that it does require that local jurisdictions approve at least one ADU for new construction that can be up to 800 square feet and up to 16 feet tall with 4-foot side and rear setbacks. This is for this one particular ADU that has to be allowed on properties. Local jurisdictions cannot impose other objective standards, such as plate height requirements. So the proposal tonight is looking at changes to the municipal code to align our local regulations with state law, as well as providing more flexibility by removing barriers to increase ADU production. So just the way we'll structure things tonight is that Melanie will present the item and we'll take public input, and the Planning Commission is recommended to adopt the draft resolution in attachment 1, which provides a recommendation to the town council for approval of an ordinance. So with that, I'll pass it over to Melanie.
Point of order, did you want the door open? It was
Keep it close.
Okay. Thank you, Sage, and thank you, Planning Commissioners. I'm Melanie Olson, Associate Planner, and I'll be presenting tonight's review of the proposed ADU ordinance pertaining to barn conversions and ADU height limitations. You all received 5 desk items. They are letters from Woodside residents and professionals that work in Woodside that include general support for the proposed ordinance changes, and one of the letters recommend expanding what is being proposed in terms of allowed plate heights for ADUs on hillside lots. Tonight, we'll be reviewing proposed municipal code changes pertaining to Chapter 153 of the zoning code in regards to barns, stables converted to ADUs, ADU heights and plate height limits, specifically for ADUs on downsloping hillside lots, ADUs and with shed roofs, and ADUs that are 800 square feet or less, and lastly, ADUs above garages. To start off, barns and stables that are converted to ADUs. The proposed ordinance would allow the full conversion of one existing barn or stable that exceeds accessory structure standards. This means the structure is greater than 1,500 square feet with 11-foot plate heights and 17 feet overall building height. This would allow it to be converted into one or more ADUs. The conversion would require the structure not to be altered, including its location, heights, and size, and to incorporate objective design standards that would maintain its equestrian and rural character. We also wanted to update the ADUs within barns section of the municipal code. So we're recommending that since barns can be up to 3,000 square feet in some zoning districts, it makes sense to remove the limit of the ADU to be 1,200 square feet or 50% of the barn, whichever is less, and maintain that the ADU can be just 50% of the barn's footprint, since we already allow ADUs to be 1,500 square feet. Next, we'll be discussing the proposed changes for the municipal code regarding ADU building heights and plate heights in regards to ADUs on downsloping hillside lots, ADUs with shed roofs, and ADUs that are 800 square feet or less. For ADUs on downsloping hillside lots, it's recognized that it's difficult to particularly construct single-level ADUs on hillside lots. Therefore, staff has proposed ordinance changes to allow the downslope side of the ADU to exceed 11-foot plate heights and 17 feet overall height, so long as the overall height of that downslope side does not exceed 28 feet tall, and the upslope side of the ADU meets 11 feet plate height and 17 feet overall. So looking at the examples, when we're talking about the downslope side not exceeding 28 feet tall, we're talking about, if we look at this cross section, this side that's on the downslope side wouldn't exceed 28 feet tall, so long as the plate height wouldn't exceed the 11 feet and the overall height wouldn't exceed the 17 feet where it's level. This would be allowed for proposed new ADUs on lots that have an average slope of 15% or greater. Just to kind of get a visual of what 15% slope looks like, here's a diagram. It's highlighted in yellow. This structure would also need to comply with basic setbacks, and it would not be allowed to exceed 1,500 square feet. Next, plate height exceptions for shed-roofed ADUs are being proposed since this is a popular architectural style among stick-built and prefabricated ADUs. The definition of a shed roof is proposed in the code changes to make it clear it is for a single pitch building roof that slopes downward in a single direction with a minimum pitch of 2x12 as shown in the example. The code amendment would allow this roof style to have one side of the ADU have a 14-foot plate height, so long as the shorter side does not exceed 11-foot plate heights. This structure would also need to meet basic setbacks. Next, the proposed municipal code changes also include the allowance of one ADU per property that is 800 square feet or less that would not require plate heights for these smaller units so long as the building height does not exceed 16 feet overall height. Lastly, ADUs above garages. These have been allowed in Woodside, but not specifically located in the ADU section of the municipal code. These units would be allowed to have 12-foot plate heights and an 18 feet overall height at the basic setbacks of the zone district. Any taller would increase the setbacks 2 feet per 1 foot over the 12-foot plate height or the 18-foot tall building height. And these would be allowed to be up to 24 feet tall overall building height. Staff is available for questions, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Commissioner Epfel, you have any questions for staff?
I do. Forgive me if these are a little bit all over the map, but my first question is, do we have data on the overall ADU status in town over the last 4 or 5 years since regulations like this started, state regulations started coming online? I'm just curious as to what kind of overall momentum there is for ADUs. I mean, I feel it, but do we have data?
We do. I don't have it at my fingertips. So if you recall the housing element, we had a target of 15 units per year. And that was based on a 4-year average. I think between 2018 and 22, you know, we had a lull during 2020. It kind of brought down our average. But it was important we kept it at that 4-year average for reasons. But since then, the town has, since 2023 and 2024, we've exceeded 20 per year. I want to say about 22 to 23 in each of these years. And so we are increasing ADU production. And I'm sure part of it has to do with some of the changes that have been made.
And thank you. And in your opinion, is some of this momentum attributable to the fact that, or can you draw an inference that this means that the majority of the town folk who are doing projects are actually interested in ADUs?
Yes, we've, and Melanie could probably speak to more other planners who speak to people on a more day-to-day basis than I do these days. But yes, we are receiving a lot more inquiries of ADUs. I think ADUs just, generally have received a lot more attention and press. I watch the news and you see different pieces on ADU construction. So the word is getting out there. The town has done a number of things for outreach. We're also part of the San Mateo County ADU Resource Center, which is now, they just started to get up and running this last year. And they're also proposing and providing more, I would say, sessions for residents and property owners to learn about how to finance an ADU, how to rent ADUs, the process for construction. So there's definitely a lot more interest that we see, especially just in the last few years.
Awesome, thank you. Quick follow-up, and this one might be even harder to answer, although you did quite well with the first one. Are we aware of any ADU applications that have been denied or declined because they didn't fit with these present proposed changes?
I wouldn't suggest that we've necessarily denied applications, but we have received inquiries from owners in which that we're having trouble meeting current regulations. And I would say specifically, we have at least 2 or 3 owners who have a strong interest in converting their barns to ADUs. In one particular example, it's a barn. It's actually less than 1,500 square feet. It just so happens to have plate heights over 11 feet tall. And so therefore, it doesn't qualify as a typical accessory structure because barns can be taller and larger. And that owner has no interest in keeping livestock on the property. It's a great building, actually. And they have a strong interest in converting that to an ADU. We've also had similar interest on other properties in which an owner actually does have horses, but their barn, for insurance purposes, is not housing horses there. They're housing their horses off site. And they're looking to convert their barn to an ADU. So they haven't submitted applications knowing that the current regulations are providing some restrictions. But therefore, it's some of the reasons why we're looking to provide more flexibility for some of the input that we receive from homeowners that come to the counter.
Got it, thanks. Just one more quick one, and it's very specific. Is there a rationale behind limiting the barn conversions to 1 per property?
There is. The concern is that folks don't start, convert 1 barn to an ADU, which could be 3,000 square feet on a footprint, which could be a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot structure itself if it has 2 levels. And then from then going to building another barn on the property and then converting that to an ADU and trying to, the state law says you have to allow 1 conversion. And so therefore, of any size, of any accessory structure. And therefore, we felt as a way to provide this restriction that it would limit someone who's trying to construct several large ADUs on a property. And some of that is the smaller a building can be less expensive. And so it's helpful to, I think, create and maintain a range of different types of ADUs that can be allowed in the town.
Still complying with state law?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Allow at least the 1.
Yep, understood. Thank you very much.
So, question on the barn conversions specifically. So if there's a large barn, say 4,000 square feet, what governs that conversion? Does it then trigger the quantity of ADUs that we talked about in the previous meeting would apply? And maybe like in an extreme case, say there was like a 10,000 square foot barn.
Mm-hmm.
How would that manifest in terms of the proposed limits? Like what would govern be carved up there?
Sure. So, per the state law and how HCD interprets the law, that conversion would be allowed. But as any ADU on a property, it would count towards the total amount of ADUs that you're allowed under our local ordinance. Our local ordinance is more permissive than state law, so we have no conflicts there. But other than that, there really, that conversion is really going to be focused on and governed by the building code and making sure all health and safety issues are taken into account with the conversion.
And so hypothetically, I think if it was a large lot, they would still have the 4 ADU limit, right?
That's correct.
The 10,000 square foot hypothetical barn could be carved up into, say, 4 2,500 square foot use.
Yes, that's a good question. And so it's something we thought about a lot, actually. And the way it's written, and even, currently, if someone wanted to do, say, 2 ADUs in their house, there's no prohibition on that. So the code would not prohibit somebody from doing something like that. And again, it's another way that, to provide different flexibility and types of ADUs throughout the town.
And on the barns, is there any vision around like the existing structures versus sort of go forward structures? So kind of
Sure.
building on the point earlier on.
Mhm.
building
Yeah,
Subsequent barns, et cetera.
So again, another thing we thought about a lot. And, historically there's, it's an equestrian community, rural character of Woodside, equestrian heritage is very important as part of Woodside. And trying to be careful of what impacts would we be creating to that equestrian heritage and people for retaining or keeping horses or other livestock on their property. So what someone who's not using a barn for livestock, under current definitions, it should be sitting there empty. And this will now allow for the conversion and the ADU production. If somebody has converted one barn into an ADU and they said, I'm going to construct another barn on the property. That's another way. So we're still not restricting livestock. People can still create other shelters for livestock on the property. If they were going to do that, we have a process for that, especially if it's a larger barn. So whenever you're over 2,000 square feet, you're automatically triggering ASRB review, 2-step review, conceptual and formal design review. We do ask these projects to go to the livestock committee for their input. So they would be following the process to construct a barn on the property. So they would still have to follow all those steps. Whereas if somebody just said, hey, I want to build an ADU that's, 11-foot plate height, 17 feet overall, 1,500 max, they could come straight to a building permit for that. So it's not to say people won't try to build other structures and convert them down the road. And that's why we wanted to look at the restriction for one conversion. But they could still create other ADUs without having to go through that detailed discretionary process.
I think where I'm trying to probe a little bit is, so say property that has no barn today, and then build, like what's the maximum size barn?
So it's either 2,500 square feet in some zoning districts and 3,000 in others.
So that's a hard maximum. barn.
That's a hard maximum, but we do just count the footprints.
Doesn't exist.
No, unless there are some older barns out there that probably exceed 3,000 square feet. But this is also, again, these are the footprints. The barns, we only count the footprints. So if somebody had a 3,000 square foot barn, upper level in that barn, it potentially could be larger than 3,000 square feet.
So you could do like a 6,000 square foot barn.
Potentially. Depending on the design, you might be more in the 5,000 square foot range or so.
So then would sort of max out. If someone just builds the barn for the purposes of converting it later, I'm just trying to understand. Does that get larger entitlement than if they're?
It would allow a larger unit than is allowed just under the new construction of an ADU. But under state law and HCD's interpretation, have to allow at least the conversion of one accessory structure, and do not take size into account under how HCD looks at the law.
Yeah, the one, it's more of a comment than a question, but the one thing that I think we'll want a little bit is sort of the comparison between what can be built just out of right versus if someone were to say, we don't kind of create incentives to, cool. And then the last question is the piece around the small ADUs with the 16-foot and no plate height, that's purely because that's what the state requires.
The state requires that you have to allow one new build, you can limit it up to 800, but you have to allow the 16-foot tall, and you can't, and then the 4-foot side and rear setbacks, can't impose any other even objective standards. Whereas we can still impose the objective plate height standards for other ADUs, ones larger than that. But for this, and therefore other ADUs can go up to 17 feet tall, sometimes 18 feet on top of a garage, that kind of stuff. But therefore we thought it would be important to just keep it to what the state law allows, and therefore limiting it to 16 feet, given that they might be closer to a property line and to reduce impacts to neighbors. Doesn't mean they couldn't do other types of ADUs. It just means for that particular one.
Richard, do you have any questions?
Oh, I just had a question regarding, does the city have inventory of barns in the town? Number of
Not to my knowledge. There are stable licenses that probably can be tracked in town. Now, stable licenses are only required for keeping of horses. Sometimes people have barns that keep other types of livestock. I do not believe we have a comprehensive inventory of barns.
We don't know if it's like 100 or 300 or anything like that.
No, I would suspect that we would not receive a flood of applications for conversions of barns.
So
I think
At this point, it's only been two. you're saying.
we've had at least two inquiries, and there's a resident of the community who also owns a firm that constructs ADUs and designs ADUs, submitted a letter as a desk item today, and also in the packet there's a letter from that Inspire ADUs. And I believe she may have mentioned at least 3 of her clients are interested in barn conversion.
Right, thank you.
So Melanie, could you go back to your slide that dealt with ADUs above garages? And I also want to compliment you on the slide deck because some of the topics that are addressed with these ordinance changes, it's a lot easier to explain on a slide as opposed to just pure text in the proposed ordinance.
Right.
And that you sort of have to infer what you're really trying to get at, and this makes it a lot clearer.
Awesome.
So on the ADUs above garages, once you're inside the basic setback for the zoning district, for every 2 feet you're inside the basic setback, you go up 1 foot in additional verticality that's allowed.
Correct.
And so if you're starting at 12-foot plate height and overall height of 18 feet, if you're, say, 10 feet in from the basic setback, and that would turn into a 5-foot increase in height, is that additive for the two, or do both numbers just go up by 5?
I think it says, I think it's for both. Let me see. Yeah, so it'd be for both of the plate height and the overall height.
Right, so both numbers go up by 5.
Correct.
And that's clear in the way that the draft ordinance is worded.
Right, yes, because it says plate heights up to 12 feet and building heights up to 18 feet pursuant to the height section.
Yep, okay. That was my only question.
Thank you.
If we have no more questions for staff, I guess we can open the public comment period on this item. So we have one person here in the. Please.
Hi, I'm Daryl Batchelder, 319 Highland Terrace. I have some general thoughts about ADUs. I think what you're proposing is fine. I don't object to it in any way. And you probably don't want to talk about specific issues, but there's a couple of, if you give me 2 minutes, there's a couple of things that I just think it doesn't make sense from a common sense point of view. We have on our property, it's been there since before the town was installed, created. a 750-foot garage, which has always been, which is a large garage, two-car garage, but it's 450 feet, so there's room in the back for woodworking and storage and stuff. And then the third of it was kind of like what you might call a pool house. And it had running water, and it had sewage, and it had electricity. So we're going to convert this, we're trying to convert this to an ADU. And I would say there's probably 75 things that they wanted me to do. And I'll mention a couple of them that I think are unusual. So there's supposed to be a certain level of quality of your insulation. And, you know, maybe it's RS14 or RS17. Well, for me to go and convert that, I'd have to tear all the walls out. And so since one of the walls is already connected to a garage, which is not outside, so it's a little warmer, you know, you'd wonder if you really have to do that. And then we have a flooring, and, you know, they want a certain amount of plastic that's underneath it. And I think we have that, but it's probably not quite as thick as it needs to be for 2025 regulations. We've done all the electricity. We had a door going from the ADU, proposed ADU, to the garage. They said, well, we should take that out because it could be some gas leaks coming through, even though it was a fireproof door. But now you're proposing to put ADUs above garages, so I would think that that would be even worse, because if you got the fumes going upstairs, that's worse. This is, it's a 300 square foot area. It's 25 by 12. They wanted a second exit, so we had to take out a window out and put in a larger window so that the firemen could get in and out. And that's just a few of them, but we have done 12, 15 things that have cost quite a bit of money. And I think maybe we're only halfway or a third of the way there in terms of all of these minor items. So my thought is and this is only 300 square feet, and it's an existing building. The other thing is we have 5 parking places on the property when the Glens is a real problem because we don't have any parking. So and the lot is flat. I mean, there's every reason why we should convert it to an ADU. But just the process has been, seems a little overwhelming. And that's because the building was originally built in '52. So it's not going to have all of the things that you'd want in a 2025 building. So that's my spiel, and just think about it if there can be some exceptions. Obviously, the Planning Commission, I could come in and say, okay, I've made 22 of these, and would you waive these 5? I understand that's there, but I'm just meaning in general, if you might consider, you've got regulations for how you want to build, but for ADUs, this is almost like a junior ADU because it's connected to the garage instead of being connected to the house. So there's a lot of factors. So I've used up my 2 minutes. Thank you for your time. Just consider lowering some of the requirements to make these conversions. Okay?
Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you.
Is there anyone online that would like to speak?
Yes, we have a raised hand from Phil Lee.
Please unmute them, and Phil, we would love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, hi. First off, I want to applaud. I think a lot of these decisions are regarding like the plate heights and the height requirements are certainly welcome from like a design perspective. I think I really wanted to address Melanie's slide on the downsloping lots. And that with the downslope side max height being 28, but the upslope side plate height being 11 feet. And I was wondering if that doesn't have maybe an adverse effect on the actual design of that ADU. You know, the picture that you showed from the upslope side or from the downslope side shows a pitched roof, but it doesn't show the rear and the cross section shows that you'd have to have a hip on that side. And I wonder just aesthetically whether that's as nice as say just a clean pitched roof. Again, I appreciate, I think the choices in adjusting the height requirements, but I wonder if that restriction on the upslope side could be amended to maybe at least like two sides with 11-foot plate heights so that you could actually do a pitched roof without having to add a hip on the upslope side.
Thank you.
Next, we have David Middleman.
Good evening, Commissioners. David Middleman, 280 Grandview, member of the ASRB, but speaking as a private citizen tonight. I submitted a desk item with some detailed recommendations about downhill plate heights and uphill plate heights. But as you guys look at the downhill slope problem, I would ask, and any other code changes that we're looking at with regards to ADUs and objective design standards, that we also do it in the lens of one of the goals of the Woodside housing element, which was to promote availability of housing for special needs groups and seniors. One of the challenges of doing an ADU on a downhill slope is that then trying to put in an ADA accessible ramp of 1x12, which requires 36 square feet for every foot of drop. Whereas if you're able to increase those uphill plate heights, you can have a flat ramp or a bridge or a walkway. That's my main comment, and I'm not going to try and repeat what's in my desk item though, but please take a look as you do deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
There are no other raised hands.
Given the fact we have no one in the audience and we have no raised hands online, with that, I will close the public comment period on this item and open it for commissioner discussion. Richard, do you want to start down on your end, or do you want to defer to Matt?
So, seeing the amount of time that has been put into the design and the changes to the ordinance, just by reading the information that we were given, I agree with, and I don't have any objections to any of the stipulations, the heights and the other requirements and changes that have occurred. So at this point, I do not have any further comments nor objections to the ordinance.
Matt Gar?
Also understands. Well, the desk item, but the one with the downslope one. Okay, so this one, so I understand the plate height at the front end is 11 max.
Correct. And the plate height is where the eave of the roof and the exterior wall meet.
Okay. And right, so this one could be, there's no need for that hip because the plate heights would still be 11. Like that.
Correct.
Okay. And then on the downhill slope side, there's no plate height restriction, only the
Overall height.
overall height. Okay.
And sorry to interrupt. We'll note that these are images just trying to depict kind of the general idea. There are, if you look on the image on the right side, that would have a gable roof on the front end as well.
And that's understood. And then how did we arrive at 28 for the height?
What we looked at is just comparable to an R1 district, tight limit. We've also, the Planning Commission may recall, there's been 2 variances, at least, that have been approved for downsloping lots. And we looked at those 2 examples. One of them was 4-foot height or so.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to provide flexibility, but something that wasn't going to be taller than, say, a typical house in an R1 district.
And then how does the setbacks, because I know ADUs, the setbacks can be modified. Would we still have a typical setback for a situation where it is a 28-foot?
Correct. These structured would need to meet required setbacks.
So you're not gonna have a situation where you have like a setback.
Correct. Yeah, they would need to come in for a variance.
We were just trying to be careful. I know Mr. Middleman's comments, have examples, something closer to a road. And we totally understand those comments and, providing something that's easily accessible from the roadway. We did, start with looking at what was allowed in the Glens for detached garages, realizing that, garages have to be tied to the roadway. It's just the nature of a garage. Whereas many of these ADUs that we've seen are actually in backyards and we felt if we're going to allow, in the future, we could see how these work out and there could be room for some increased flexibility. But just as we take steps forward, trying to be careful of impacts to neighbors.
So I think the one other piece, and I had a question to clarify. Here, which is going back to this sort of large barn situation earlier. Can you just remind us, because I don't, what was the maximum we approved on the 4 large lot 4 ADUs? What was the square footage limitation that
So we didn't change it. So the maximum square footage allowed for ADUs historically in Woodside, ever since I've been here, over 17 years or almost 17 years, and well before that, it's been 1,500 square feet. So that was acknowledged that, allowing the 3 ADUs plus the 1 JADU, this JADU is up to 500 square feet. And then the 3 other ADUs could be up to 1,500 square feet each, subject to your total floor area allowed on your property, with up to 800 square feet being exempt.
So it doesn't seem like there's still getting.
Yeah, I mean, you have your 1 barn, it gets converted. That may put you up to your TFA limit. It may put you past your TFA limit. We'd still allow for that conversion because it's not changing the size of it itself. But down the road, it could provide future limitations.
That if you've gone over the TFA limit with that barn, then you're basically done for that property.
Or they would shift things around in other ways if they wanted to, say, convert part of their house that didn't increase their ADU, or I'm sorry, that didn't increase their TFA. If they wanted to, take an old structure down and build an ADU, or if they wanted to convert a conforming structure to an ADU.
With any of this, it's still just the 800 square foot total exemption from TFA.
That's correct. We have not made that change at this, any changes to that at this time.
Sense. I mean, my thought process is it's generally a good way of getting more ADUs, reusing these structures. It doesn't seem like there's any major holes. And I think, with the large height on the downhill slope being subject to setbacks, it seems reasonable and doesn't really do any more visual harm than what you would have with building a single family residence. So I'm generally supportive here.
Commissioner Apfel?
I have a couple of comments. First, I'd like to say that I'm very aligned with fellow commissioners and their comments, echo almost all of them. And I really appreciate the amount of time and thought that's gone into this through the study session and the planning. It's really thorough. A couple of things I'd like to point out that I'm particularly supportive of. I think that preserving barns and structures is really important at this town. Even as the livestock and horses might not be there, the structures are a nice element that clearly falls within the rural character. So that part really resonates strongly with me. And I also felt that the shed roof approach was really smart, given that prefab ADUs can accelerate or make it much easier for folks to deploy. And, as we established in talking about some of the historical data, it seems like many residents of the town are quite interested in ADUs. So I'm supportive of anything that makes it easier, not anything, but this particular part of the proposed changes seems to be a very simple way for folks to get into the ADU world. I do agree with Vice Chair Gar that there's a potential loophole, somebody building a massive barn and then badly acting somewhere down the road and subdividing, whatever you would call it. But I also agree with his conclusion that the overall benefit of these proposed changes far outweighs that risk of a bad actor coming into town. So I'm wildly supportive of this as drafted.
My one question to staff, and I think I know the answer to this, in the case of ADUs on downslope lots, if we had an issue where a particular site or someone wished to construct an ADU with handicapped access and needed a ramp, and that could, of course, be addressed via the variance process, correct?
That's correct. Again, we're trying to just kind of incrementally provide more flexibility, and there may be other instances on a case-by-case basis where it makes sense, especially in some type of accessibility issues. And so there still is the process for folks to go through and have those looked at a little bit more carefully. They just wouldn't be something that would come in straight through a building permit process.
And that variance, for something like that, would that be an ASRB thing, or that would be a planning commission thing?
That would come to the planning commission, depending on the size and what else is occurring. It might also go to ASRB for design recommendation, but the decision would lie with the planning commission.
Okay. My fellow commissioners have already covered the hot points that I have observed, so I have nothing more to add beyond what they've already said. Was there any desire to tweak anything that's in the proposed ordinance or text and resolution for tonight?
None for me.
Given that, I would entertain a motion to pass the draft resolution recommending that the town council make these changes.
So moved.
Second.
Chair Weaver,
Yes.
Vice Chair Gar,
Yes.
Commissioner Apfel,
Yes.
and Commissioner Gonarco.
Yes.
Right, that takes care of this item, which was the main item on tonight's agenda. Sage, do you have anything else for us tonight?
No, we'll just note that there is no appeal process for this. It's a recommendation to the town council, and we are proposing to bring it to the town council. I just want to make sure I have the date right. On March 11th. This is proposed to be heard by the town council. And we also have a running list of folks who have been interested in ADU topics. They all have been notified of this meeting and will continue to be notified on any changes or updates to ADU stuff in town.
Do you have any prognostications as to when our next planning commission meeting will be?
We do not have anything for the next meeting, which is the 3rd.
The 5th. We were saving the 5th just in case we continued tonight, but it looks like we won't have any items, so that will be canceled.
Okay.
And we'll check if we have anything for the second meeting of March. I have nothing further to add at this time.
Unless anyone else has something further, I'm prepared to adjourn the meeting. So this meeting is adjourned.